I don't care if the system says it's expired. The email said it was good through Sunday. The kid behind the register just stared at me. He looked 16, with a smudge of gray on his cheek, and a completely vacant expression. I didn't move. I stood there in my heavy parka, shivering because the store blasted the AC like it was a meat locker. In the child seat of the cart, I sorted through a pile of mismatched soccer socks, trying to find pairs while the line behind me grew. The teenager sighed and looked at his manager. He didn't say a word, he just pointed at the screen. Just scan it again, I told him. My voice sounded thin, like it was about to snap. Please, just scan it again. While he fumbled with the scanner, I reached into my oversized tote bag for my phone. My fingers brushed against the thick manila folder containing our tax documents for the CPA. The folder had fallen open. Tucked under a W-2, I saw a small glossy slip of paper, a receipt for a DNA paternity test kit. I stopped sorting the socks. The receipt showed a date from 3 months ago. It bore Richard's name. It's not working, ma'am, the kid said, sliding the coupon back across the belt. I didn't argue. I pushed the cart forward, paid full price for the organic blueberries, and walked out into the humid Houston afternoon. The drive home took 45 minutes. That's the problem with these sprawling McMansions in the suburbs. You have 6,000 square feet of granite and crown molding, but you can't buy a gallon of milk without a cross-country expedition. I pulled into the driveway and looked at the house. It looked like a monument to a life we couldn't actually afford. On paper, we earned enough to look wealthy. That meant we made too much to qualify for any kind of financial assistance, but the mortgage and property taxes ate us alive. Every month felt like a game of Tetris with the bank accounts. I shifted money from savings to checking, just to make sure the lawn service didn't quit. Silence filled the house. Richard stayed in his home office, probably on another conference call. I walked into the kitchen and set the groceries on the island. I pulled the DNA receipt out of my bag and laid it flat on the marble. The front door opened and Sherry Moody walked in without knocking. My mother-in-law didn't believe in boundaries. She believed in family transparency. Mostly, that meant she liked to know exactly how much my rugs cost, so she could tell me they were the wrong shade of beige. Bless your heart, Megan, you look exhausted, Sherry said, gliding toward the fridge. She wore a floral dress that looked like it belonged at a 50s garden party. Is the soccer schedule getting to you? I told Richard you should just hire a driver for the kids. We can't afford a driver, Sherry, I said. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the receipt. Sherry paused, her hand on the refrigerator door. She gave me a small, pitying smile. Well, maybe if you managed the household budget a bit more strictly, you wouldn't feel so pinched. Richard works so hard for this family. She didn't see the receipt. She too busy eyeing the tray of appetizers I'd prepped for the baby shower I was hosting this weekend for our neighbor, Sarah. Anyway, Sherry continued, I just wanted to make sure the guest list for Saturday is finalized. The Millers are coming, and you know how Brenda gets if she feels slighted. The Millers lived in our inner circle, the couple friends we spent every Friday night with. We all played the part. The wives talked about Peloton and organic meal prep, and the husbands talked about portfolios and real estate. But lately, I noticed a weird energy between the men. Richard and Mark Miller started spending more time together, networking, at the gym, or grabbing late-night drinks. They both became strangely protective of their phones. Whenever I asked Richard who he was texting, he just sighed, rolled his eyes, and called me insecure. I shoved the DNA receipt into the trash can under a pile of paper towels. I didn't want to think about it. I told myself it was some weird health screening or a genealogy hobby. I didn't want to start a fight over a piece of paper when I was already vibrating with fatigue. Saturday arrived with the kind of passive-aggressive tension only a Deep South baby shower produces. Women in pastel dresses filled the house, offering me helpful tips on nursery organization while they ate the lemon tarts I'd spent 4 hours baking. While I refilled drinks in the kitchen, Sarah leaned in and whispered, I heard the Hendersons are separating. Apparently, someone found a second phone in the glove box. Just a warning. These neighborhoods have a way of hiding things, don't they? She laughed, a light, airy sound, and drifted away to talk to Brenda. The comment sounded important, but Sarah gossiped about everyone. I tried to ignore it, but the DNA receipt flashed in my mind. I noticed a stack of mail on the entryway table that Richard had dumped there that morning. He usually sorted it, but he'd been distracted, rushing out to help Mark with something. I reached for a glossy envelope, thinking it was a magazine. Instead, it was a formal notice from a company I'd never heard of, Apex Quick Credit. The envelope didn't bear Richard's name. It didn't bear mine. It was addressed to our 7-year-old son, Leo. I frowned and pulled the letter out. It was a final notice of overdue payment for a high-interest personal loan. The balance looked staggering, nearly $15,000, and the interest rate looked predatory. I checked the date. Someone took out the loan 18 months ago. I stood there, frozen, holding a tray of sparkling water and staring at a debt collection notice for a second grader. If this went south and we separated, I had no idea who could actually stay in this house. We didn't have the cash to split it, and we certainly didn't have the cash to buy each other out. I set the tray of sparkling water on the granite island. It made a loud clatter that echoed through the kitchen. My hands shook. I looked at the letter again. Apex Quick Credit had addressed it to Leo. A 7-year-old doesn't take out a $15,000 loan. I walked back into the living room. Richard stood by the fireplace, laughing at something Mark Miller said. Both men held their phones, thumbs scrolling rapidly. Richard looked relaxed in his crisp button-down shirt. He had no idea. I felt like I was vibrating with panic and heat. I didn't want to make a scene in front of the guests, but I couldn't just hold the paper. I stepped closer and held the notice toward him. Richard, what is this? He didn't look at the paper at first. He kept smiling at Mark, then slowly shifted his gaze to the envelope. He took it from my hand, glanced at it for 2 seconds, and handed it back. He didn't look surprised or confused. It's probably just a scam, Megan, he said. He shifted his weight and looked back at his phone. People buy data on the dark web all the time. Just throw it away. It's a final notice for an overdue payment, I said. My voice sounded thin. It has Leo's name and our address. How does a scammer get a specific loan balance and a final notice date? Richard sighed. He made the sound long and exaggerated, like I was a nuisance. He finally looked at me with a flat expression. You're overthinking it. Again. Honestly, I don't know why you're letting this ruin the party. Before I could respond, Brenda Miller drifted over. She held a plate of my lemon tarts and gave me a small, concerned look. It was the kind of look you give someone having a public breakdown. Is everything okay, honey? Brenda asked. You look a little peaked. Maybe you should sit down for a minute. I'm fine, I lied. I glanced at Richard. Mark stepped in and clapped Richard on the shoulder. Don't let the stress get to you, man. We've got that networking dinner on Tuesday, right? We'll figure out the portfolio stuff then. Mark gave me a polite, distant smile. Richard and Mark exchanged a quick, knowing glance. That look made my stomach flip. It didn't look like shared guilt. It looked like shared confidence. It made me feel small, like I was the only person in the room who didn't understand a joke. For a second, I wondered if I imagined the urgency of the letter. Maybe Richard set up some weird insurance thing for the kids that I didn't know about. Then I remembered the DNA receipt. The rest of the shower passed in a blur of pastel dresses and polite conversation. I moved through the house like a ghost. I nodded and smiled, while my mind looped back to the mortgage. I looked up at the soaring ceilings and the expensive crown molding and felt nausea. Our property taxes were due in 3 weeks. The bill was high enough to make me dizzy. We barely scraped by, shifting money between accounts like a shell game just to keep the lights on. We earned too much to qualify for any financial assistance, but we had too much debt to actually survive the month. Now, there was a $15,000 debt in my son's name. If this was real, and if Richard had lied to me for 18 months, our entire life was a lie. I thought about the legal side. Who would stay in the house if we separated? We had no liquid cash. We couldn't afford to buy each other out, and we certainly couldn't afford 2 separate places in this part of Houston. The thought of losing the house because of a loan in Leo's name made me want to scream. Instead, I stood there and handed Sarah another napkin. Once the guests left and the house went silent, I waited. Richard went into the guest bathroom to freshen up. He left his laptop open on the dining room table. I didn't feel like a spy. Desperate. I sat down and opened the browser. I didn't look for secret folders or hidden emails. I went straight to our shared bank portal and the credit monitoring app we used to track our mortgage readiness. The bank statements looked clean. Too clean. I saw no payments to Apex Quick Credit. No withdrawals matched the loan's likely monthly installments. I scrolled through the last year of transactions. I noticed a pattern. Richard moved small amounts. 500 here, 800 there. From our joint savings into a separate account. I didn't recognize the account. It was in Richard's name only. Then I found a PDF in the downloads folder. It wasn't a confession. It was a spreadsheet. He meticulously tracked a list of payments, but he didn't label them as loans. He labeled them as consulting fees, Mark Miller. I stared at the screen, my heart hammered against my ribs. The amounts matched the gaps in our savings. But the spreadsheet didn't explain the loan in Leo's name. It only showed Richard sending money to Mark. What are you doing on my computer? I jumped and nearly knocked the laptop off the table. Richard stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and his face tight. He sounded irritated, not concerned. The transfers, Richard, I said. My voice cracked. Who is Why are you sending Mark Miller thousands of dollars from our savings? Richard didn't move. He didn't grab the computer or start shouting. He just looked at me with a kind of pity that felt like a slap. It's a private investment, Megan, he said. Mark and I are pooling resources for a venture. I didn't tell you because you always panic about money. I'm trying to build something for the kids. And the loan? I asked. I pointed to the Apex notice on the table. The loan in Leo's name? Is that part of the investment too? Richard paused. He looked at the letter, then back at me. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward the window. I handled that, he said softly. It was a temporary bridge loan. It's already being taken care of. You don't need to worry about the details. He didn't say who took the loan. He didn't say why he used a 7-year-old's name. He gave me a half answer and walked toward the kitchen to pour a drink. My phone buzzed on the table. I saw a text from Sherry. Bless your heart for hosting such a lovely shower. By the way, Richard mentioned you're feeling a bit stressed lately. Maybe we should talk about a more sustainable budget for the house? Love you. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Bless your heart. That's the official anthem of my neighborhood. It's just a polite way to call someone a failure while you hand them a slice of lemon cake. Sherry had already coordinated with Richard to label me as stressed. And it made my skin feel too tight. I heard ice clink in a glass from the kitchen. Richard leaned against the counter, staring at his phone. He was probably texting Mark Miller about their portfolio again. Your mother thinks I need a budget meeting, I said. I kept my voice flat, like I was reading a grocery list. Richard didn't look up. He shifted his weight, his thumb still scrolling. She's just trying to be helpful, Megan. You've been on edge. Everyone notices. I'm on edge because there's a $15,000 loan in our son's name, I said. He finally looked at me, but his eyes stayed vacant. He sighed. That long, slow exhale he uses when he's bored with me. I told you, it's handled. I don't know why you're making this a thing. He walked past me toward the stairs. He didn't touch me or even glance back. I stood there in the silence of 6,000 square feet, thinking about the property taxes due in 3 weeks. I looked at the bill sitting on the entryway table. We make too much money to qualify for any kind of assistance. But we have too much debt to actually survive the month. We are one bad payment away from the bank, taking the crown molding and the granite islands. Earlier that day, Mrs. Gable had mentioned seeing Elena, Richard's sister, at a pharmacy in the next town overlooking Frail. Mrs. Gable always talks like she's delivering a secret, but it's usually just gossip about who's buying generic brand soap. At the time, I ignored it. An hour later, while Richard was in the shower, I dug through the everything drawer in the kitchen. I wanted a spare USB-C cable for my Kindle, so I pushed through dead batteries, old takeout menus, and rubber bands. My fingers hit something hard and plastic. I pulled out an old iPad Richard stopped using a year ago. I wiped the dust off the screen and pressed the home button. He never set a passcode. He's always been lazy with his old devices. The screen flickered to life. A notification popped up from an old Gmail account. It wasn't a bank alert. It was a confirmation from a clinic in San Antonio. I sat down on the kitchen floor. The linoleum felt cold against my thighs. I opened the email and found a receipt for a surgical abortion dated 4 months ago. The patient's name was Elena. Richard paid the bill in full, using a credit card ending in 4402. That was the number for the private account Richard had been funneling money into. I thought about the DNA receipt I'd found in the store 3 months ago. The timing didn't perfectly align with the procedure, but then I scrolled down to the email thread. The test confirms it. Richard wrote in one email to Sherry. It's mine. We can't let this get out. Megan would lose it, and the Millers would never look at us the same. Sherry replied immediately. I've already spoken to Elena. We'll call it a miscarriage. A tragic loss. People are always kinder when there's a tragedy involved. Just make sure the money gets to the clinic by Friday. I'll handle the family announcement. I didn't move. I just stared at the screen. I remembered the weekend Elena lost the baby. I remembered the way Sherry held her while we all sat in a circle in the living room, whispering about the cruelty of nature. I spent 3 days cooking meals for Elena and rubbing her back. The DNA test wasn't for Leo. Richard used it to confirm he was the father of his own sister's child before he paid to erase the evidence. The shower stopped upstairs. The pipes groaned in the walls. I closed the email and shoved the iPad back into the drawer under a stack of menus. I didn't want to confront him yet. The panic shifted into a cold, calculated precision. I walked back to the living room and sat on the sofa. I opened my laptop and went straight to the joint account. I took screenshots of every single transfer to that private account. I created a new folder on my cloud drive and named it Legal. I started listing the assets, the house, the 2 cars, the remaining balance in the savings. I felt a jolt of nausea when I realized the house was a liability. We don't have the equity to buy each other out, and the mortgage is a mountain we can barely climb. If Richard spent our savings on consulting fees for Mark Miller and secret clinics in San Antonio, we aren't just broke. We're drowning. Richard came downstairs smelling of sandalwood and steam. He wore a robe, his hair still damp. He looked at me, then at the laptop. Obsessing over the numbers? He asked. He walked to the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. I'm just organizing some things for the CPA, I said. He shrugged. Whatever. I'm heading to the gym. I'll be back around 6. Are you seeing Mark today? He paused with the water bottle halfway to his lips. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the clock on the wall. Yeah. We're just finalizing some things for Tuesday. Right. The portfolio stuff. Exactly. He left the room without looking at me. I heard the heavy thud of the front door and the sound of his SUV pulling out of the driveway. I stayed on the sofa for a long time. I thought about the loan in Leo's name. If Richard kept a secret this big with his sister and his mother, the bridge loan was a lie. He wasn't taking care of it. He used Leo's identity because his own credit report was probably shredded. My phone buzzed with a text from Sherry. Thinking of you. Sweetie, I'm bringing over a chicken casserole tomorrow for dinner. I think it would be a wonderful time for us to sit down and really map out your spending habits. Love you. I didn't reply. I went back to the laptop and searched for divorce attorneys in Houston who specialized in hidden assets and financial fraud. I ignored the ones with the fancy websites and looked for the ones who mentioned aggressive discovery in their bios. I spent the next 3 hours downloading every bank statement from the last 2 years. My eyes burned and my head throbbed, but I didn't stop. I found a strange sense of relief in the paperwork. The betrayal was too big to process, but I could manage a spreadsheet. Around 5:30, my phone buzzed again. It was a group text from the inner circle, Mark, Brenda, and the others. Can't wait for the networking dinner Tuesday. It's going to be a game changer for the portfolio. Mark had written. I stared at the message, then looked at the legal folder on my screen. I didn't know what the game changer was, but I knew I wouldn't be the only one surprised on Tuesday. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen to start dinner. I moved silently through the house like a stranger. Stirring a pot of pasta, I watched steam hit the vent. The hallway echoed with every small sound, amplifying the emptiness of the house. When Richard opened the front door and walked in, I kept stirring. I listened to him toss his keys on the entryway table with that same arrogant clink he's used for 10 years. Smells okay, he said. Leaning against the counter, he checked his watch. I've got a call with Mark in 20 minutes. We're tweaking the presentation for Tuesday. I finally looked at him. He wore the groomed beard and the expensive watch, yet he looked like a stranger. Earlier that day, Mrs. Gable from next door had stopped me while I gathered the mail. She leaned in and mentioned Richard's car at the club on a Thursday afternoon when he was supposed to be in Atlanta. She called it a concern, but she leaned in close, eyes searching mine for a reaction. At the time, I brushed it off as neighborhood gossip. Looking at him, the comment lingered. "The city wants the property taxes in 2 weeks, Richard," I said, keeping my voice flat. I checked the escrow account. "We don't have enough to cover the increase." He sighed and looked at the ceiling, shifting his weight. "I told you, I handled it. Stop looping on this. It's exhausting." He knew nothing of the folder on my laptop in the other room. He didn't know I'd spent the afternoon on the phone with a lawyer who specialized in dismantling men like him. While we lived in a neighborhood of performed wealth, we were drowning. Because we earned too much to qualify for help, I spent every waking hour moving money between bank accounts just to survive the month. The next afternoon, someone rang the doorbell. Sherry arrived carrying a glass baking dish of chicken casserole. She wore a floral dress suited for a garden party and a wide, practiced smile. "Bless your heart, Megan. You look absolutely exhausted," Sherry said. Setting the casserole on the island, she immediately started rearranging the fruit bowl. "I told Richard you were hitting a wall. I brought this over so we could just sit. Maybe we can go over that budget I mentioned? I have some wonderful spreadsheets for managing household leakages." I looked at the casserole. Crushed cornflakes topped the dish. Exactly what I hated. I stared at the flakes. For a second, I almost apologized for my mood. Then I spoke. "Take the casserole and leave, Sherry." She stopped mid-sentence, her hand still on a pear. "I'm sorry, I said leave," I repeated. Without shouting, I leaned in closer. "And don't worry about my budget. I'm more concerned about how much you spent helping my husband hide a surgical abortion for his sister." Sherry's face went slack. She didn't gasp or cry, she just froze. Her eyes darted toward the hallway to see if Richard was home. Her chest heaved under the floral fabric. "Look, honestly, Megan, you're not thinking clearly," she stammered. "It was a family tragedy. We were protecting you." "Get out," I said. Grabbing her purse, she left the casserole on the counter. She didn't look up back as she hurried to her car. I watched her go from the window. I looked around the kitchen and thought of the bank statements. If I left, or if he left, the debt would trigger a total financial collapse. That night, while Richard was in the shower, I sat at the computer. Following my lawyer's instructions, I worked quickly. Starting with Amazon, I changed the password, stripped his saved cards, and deleted his profile from the Prime membership. Moving to the Costco account, I updated the primary email and locked the digital membership. I wiped the passwords for Netflix, Hulu, and HBO before purging his access to the shared grocery app. He didn't know how to buy toilet paper or pay a utility bill without me clicking a button. When he came out of the bathroom, I stood in the bedroom, packing a suitcase for Leo and me. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing at the luggage. "I filed the papers this morning," I said. "A locksmith will change the locks tomorrow at 8. I put your things in the guest room and had the movers clear out your office." He stared at me, then laughed, a short, breathless sound. "You're joking. You can't just kick me out of my own house." "It's not your house, Richard. It's a liability we can't afford. The bank wants their money. And since you used our son's social security number for a bridge loan, the court will be very interested in who stays here during the discovery process." He stopped laughing. He looked at his phone, frowned, and tried to open an app. "Why is the Wi-Fi acting up?" he asked. "I changed the password," I said. He tried to argue, claiming the bridge loan was for family investments, but he couldn't name a single destination for the money. He gave a half answer about a failed venture with Mark, leaving a gap where the truth should have been. Over the next few weeks, I navigated a blur of paperwork and cold phone calls. The inner circle of couple friends vanished. Mark Miller stopped texting the group. Brenda sent one, "Thinking of you," message that I deleted without reading. Moving out took the most effort. Glancing at the soaring ceilings and granite islands, I saw the waste of 10 years. I spent 3 days forwarding mail and signing documents in a sterile office that smelled like old carpets and ozone. During the final walkthrough, I avoided looking at Richard. He looked thinner, his shirt wrinkled. He stood there, unable to figure out the next step without a manager. Last Tuesday, I signed the final lease. Standing in the center of the new place, I smelled lemon cleaner and laundry detergent. It's a 2-bedroom apartment with no crown molding and no sprawling backyard for neighbors to gossip in. The kitchen is small enough that I can reach the stove and the sink in 2 steps. I sat down on the floor and looked at the keys in my hand. The apartment doesn't have a yard, but I put the lease in my name only. Thank you so much, Megan, for trusting us with your story and sharing such an intimate look into your life. I can only imagine the weight you've been carrying, navigating the suffocating pressure of that neighborhood while discovering such deep betrayals. To deal with Richard's financial fraud involving his own son's identity, and then to uncover the twisted secret Sherry helped him hide regarding Alina. It is absolutely staggering. I am so glad you found the strength to walk away from that toxic environment and secure a safe, honest space for yourself and Leo. Now, I want to turn it over to you guys. Looking at how Megan handled this, I have to ask, do you think she should pursue further criminal charges against Richard for the identity theft of their son? Or is getting him out of her life and starting fresh in that new apartment a sufficient victory? What would you do in her shoes? Please leave your thoughts and advice for Megan in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a confession. Thanks for watching.